My day began like every other Monday at the office. Slow, predictable, and filled with a to-do list I couldn't possibly finish before the next team meeting. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly as I slumped at my desk, staring blankly at the endless rows of spreadsheets. For all the excitement I'd imagined when I first got hired here, the reality of corporate life had hit me hard over the past few years. Still, this place wasn't all bad. And by not all bad, I meant Elliot. Elliot had started in the marketing department 3 months ago, and from the moment he walked in on his first day, he turned my mundane 9 to 5 into something electric. Tall, with sharp cheekbones, sandy blonde hair, and an easy smile that could stop traffic, he had the kind of charisma that drew people to him effortlessly. Even in an office setting where personality was often stifled by beige cubicles and quarterly targets, Elliot radiated charm. And he wasn't just good-looking. He was infuriatingly good at his job too. I'd overhear him pitching ideas in meetings or catching up with clients, and it always sounded like he was meant to be there, confident, smooth, like he belonged in some big-shot advertising agency instead of our mid-sized company. The problem? Elliot was also maddeningly unaware of just how much of a distraction he was to me. Or maybe he did know and he enjoyed it. That smirk of his suggested he might. Today was no different. By 10 a.m., Elliot had already passed by my desk twice. The first time he'd given me a polite nod and a quick, "Morning, Jamie." The second time he lingered a little longer, leaning over my cubicle wall to ask if I'd received the memo about the new printer codes. I hadn't. "I'll print out a copy for you," he said, flashing me that grin again. "Meet me in the copy room in 5 minutes?" I barely managed to nod without choking on my coffee. 5 minutes turned into 7 as I tried to compose myself, but eventually I stood and made my way down the hall. The copy room was tucked into a quiet corner of the building, away from the bustle of the open office floor. It was the kind of place people went when they needed a breather, or, apparently, a private moment with a colleague. Elliot was already there when I walked in, standing by the copier with his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were unfairly distracting. The room smelled faintly of toner and paper, the hum of the machines filling the silence as he glanced up at me. "Took you long enough," he teased, holding out a freshly printed sheet. "Here's that memo." "Thanks," I said, my voice a little too tight as I reached for the paper. Our fingers brushed and I felt a jolt of something that made my breath hitch. Elliot's eyes lingered on mine for a moment too long, his playful smirk fading into something more serious. "You've been avoiding me lately." The accusation caught me off guard. "What?" "No, I haven't." "You have," he insisted, stepping closer. "You used to laugh at my jokes in meetings. Now you barely even look at me. Did I do something to upset you?" His proximity was unnerving. The copier was at my back and Elliot was standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, clean, citrusy, with a hint of something warmer underneath. I swallowed hard, trying to focus on anything other than the heat of his gaze. "You didn't do anything," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then what is it?" His tone softened. "Is it something else?" I didn't know how to answer that without giving myself away completely. The truth was I'd been avoiding him because being around him was becoming unbearable. Every smile, every accidental touch, every shared glance in a meeting, it was all too much. I tried to convince myself that my feelings were nothing more than a harmless crush, but the tension between us had been building for weeks, and it was becoming harder to ignore. Elliot's eyes searched mine and for a moment, I thought he might step back, let it go. But then he did the opposite. He leaned in. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in his posture, but it was enough to send my pulse racing. "Jamie," he said, his voice low and steady. "If I'm wrong about this, tell me now." I didn't tell him he was wrong. Before I could overthink it, his lips were on mine, warm and insistent. The kiss was everything I hadn't let myself imagine. Soft yet urgent, cautious but full of unspoken desire. For a moment, the world outside the copy room ceased to exist. There was no office, no deadlines, no reason to hold back. There was only Elliot and the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my hands clutching the edge of the copier for support. Elliot's cheeks were flushed, his lips slightly parted as he stared at me with a mix of triumph and vulnerability. I started, but the words wouldn't come. "Say something," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper. We can't." "We can," he said firmly, cutting me off. "Unless you're telling me you don't feel the same way." Of course I felt the same way. How could I not? But there were 1,000 reasons why this was a terrible idea. Office gossip, HR policies, the risk of ruining whatever fragile connection we already had. And yet, standing there with Elliot looking at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered, all those reasons felt inconsequential. This is complicated, I said finally. Life's complicated, he replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Doesn't mean it's not worth it. Before I could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hall. Elliot stepped back, the moment broken, and grabbed a random stack of papers from the copier tray. I did the same, my heart still racing as the door opened and one of our coworkers poked their head in. "Hey Elliot, Jamie," she said, glancing between us. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "No worries," Elliot said smoothly, flashing her one of his disarming smiles. "We were just finishing up." As she left, I turned to Elliot, my mind still reeling. He met my gaze with a look that was equal parts mischief and resolve. "This isn't over," he said softly, his voice filled with promise. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the copy room with nothing but the hum of the machines and the memory of his kiss to keep me company. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I could barely focus on my work, my thoughts consumed by the memory of Elliot's lips on mine and the promise in his voice. Every time I looked up from my computer screen, I half expected to see him standing there, watching me with that teasing smile. But he stayed away, and by the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I was equal parts relieved and disappointed. As I packed up my things, my phone buzzed with a text message. I pulled it out of my pocket, my heart skipping a beat when I saw Elliot's name on the screen. "Dinner? My treat. Let's talk." My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I debated how to respond. On one hand, this was exactly what I'd been hoping for, a chance to figure out what was happening between us and where we went from here. On the other hand, the thought of being alone with Elliot outside of the office was both thrilling and terrifying. After a moment's hesitation, I typed back a simple, "Sure." The evening felt heavy with anticipation as I walked into the restaurant. Elliot had chosen a small, cozy bistro on the edge of town, the kind of place where the low hum of conversation and the soft clink of glasses created an intimate atmosphere. He was already there when I arrived, leaning casually against the bar, his smile lighting up when he spotted me. "You made it," he said, stepping forward to greet me. His voice was warm, his tone easy, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper, a quiet intensity that made my pulse quicken. "Of course," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant as I shrugged off my coat. "You promised me dinner, didn't you?" He chuckled, his eyes never leaving mine. "Fair enough. I hope you came hungry." We were led to a table in a quiet corner, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across his sharp features. As the server handed us menus, I realized how little attention I was paying to the words on the page. My focus was entirely on Elliot, the way he held himself, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the table as he scanned the menu. "Any preferences?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Surprise me," I said, leaning back in my chair and folding my arms. It was a bold statement, but I wanted to see how he'd respond. His grin widened. "All right. I like a challenge." Once our orders were placed, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Work, shared anecdotes, and the odd joke that made me laugh harder than I intended. It was effortless with him, the kind of connection that felt as natural as breathing. Yet, beneath the surface, I knew we were both skirting around the real reason we were here. When the food arrived, the conversation lulled, and Elliot took a deep breath. "Listen," he began, setting down his fork and leaning slightly across the table. "I wanted to apologize for earlier. I shouldn't have caught you off guard like that." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "You mean the kiss?" He nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah. I don't regret it, but I do regret not giving you a choice. I got caught up in the moment, and that wasn't fair to you." I could feel the honesty in his words, the sincerity that made it impossible to stay guarded. "It's not that I didn't want it," I admitted quietly, surprising myself with the confession. "I just wasn't expecting it." A spark of hope flashed in his eyes. "Does that mean I wasn't completely out of line?" I smiled, unable to help myself. "Maybe just a little out of line." He laughed, the tension between us easing slightly. "Okay, I'll take that. But I need you to know something. I like you. A lot. And if this is something you're not comfortable with, I'll back off. But if there's even a chance you feel the same way, I'd really like to see where this could go." His words hung in the air, weighty and sincere. I met his gaze, my chest tightening at the vulnerability in his expression. I do feel the same way, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. But I'm scared. This changes everything. Elliot reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. I know it's a risk, he said softly. But some things are worth taking a chance on. And I think we're one of them. For a moment I didn't respond, letting his words sink in. Then slowly I turned my hand over, letting my fingers entwine with his. The gesture felt small but monumental, a quiet acknowledgement that I was willing to take that leap. All right, I said, meeting his gaze with a nervous smile. Let's see where this goes. Elliot's smile was radiant, his thumb brushing gently against my knuckles. You won't regret it, he promised, his voice steady and full of conviction. And at that moment I believed him.
Hey there. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, drop a comment, and subscribe to help us grow and keep sharing amazing content with you. And feel free to explore our other videos, we've got so much more epicness waiting for you. Thank you for being part of our journey, you're the real MVPs.